Thank you very much for being here. That was a very interesting session just finished. I hope we will be as interesting, but perhaps less controversial in this session. But it's a great pleasure to welcome you to this final session on the scientific contribution of Arctic Council observers. This session has been organised jointly by the UK Science Innovation Network, Anne Laugerson, who is here from the British Embassy in Copenhagen, thank you very much, and also by the Arctic Circle. And we have 5 fantastic speakers for you this afternoon who will reflect on that issue of scientific contribution to Arctic Council, of Arctic Council observers. They will reflect a diversity of opinion from across different countries, different backgrounds, different perspectives, and they will reflect a kind of a different approach when it comes to national priorities or international settings or kind of challenges and opportunities. We'll give each person 4 or 5 minutes to speak each, and then we will open up for the remaining time for you for questions. We are very conscious that we stand between you and something to eat and something to drink. But we want to make this final session as interactive as it possibly can be. So please do think of your questions as we go through. So without further ado, I'll invite Morten Høglund, the chair of the senior Arctic officials of the Arctic Council, to give us your thoughts and reflections. Morten, thank you.
Thank you, Henry, and thank you for having me on this panel. The observer roles in the Arctic Council is, as I already mentioned in a previous panel, it's crucial, it's important because, first of all, which is of course obvious because we are here, what's happening in the Arctic is a global concern, it's a global importance. So there are that other non-Arctic states have an interest, that's a given. It's, just an issue like rising sea levels, of course, it's an issue of concern, but there are so many others as well. And nobody can venture into solving these issues alone. And what we see is that observer states come with they come with their best, and they come with capacities, knowledge, specialized interest, which completes the picture, so to speak, and to a degree which we benefit from, truly. And observers at the best, when we are at our best and they are at their best, they innovate processes and projects and add value not only by the expertise and the capacity around the project, but bringing that project, the whole thinking of the project to the next level. So we are so grateful that we have the joint capacity of these observers, and as I also said, we truly need also to tap into other resources as well. So I think since I've been speaking before, I'll limit myself to this, just saying that this is, for us, it's a blessing, and we see the commitment and the continued commitment to be a part of what we try to achieve within the Arctic Council. And you haven't left us. And that is also a very good for us, because it gives us the ability to, envisage programs where we are truly around the same table.
Thank you very much indeed. I think we owe you thanks as well, because thinking where we were 2 years ago and projecting forward, the fact that you have restarted with the support of so many others, so much of the work of the Arctic Council, working groups and expert groups and others, that is not to be taken for granted. And although it has taken 2 years, the fact that it has been achieved is extremely meaningful. And I think we're in a much better place than we would have been had Norway not taken the approach that you have. So thank you very much indeed. Gabriela, we'll move on to you next. You're the Swiss observer to the Conservation of Arctic Flora and Fauna Working Group. You're based at the University of Zurich in Switzerland. Do you want to give us a perspective from Switzerland?
Thank you very much. Yes, first of all, I would really like to thank you very much, Morten Høglund, for kind of getting the Arctic Council moving again. This is really very much appreciated also from out Switzerland. Switzerland is an observer since 2017, and the individuals that contribute to the Arctic Council are really close to science, are active scientists. We contribute towards questions of contamination, Arctic assessment, and also to sustainable development and CAFF, as you just mentioned. And we are all the experts are also closely tied into other coordination bodies. So we actually all try to bring these international networks and knowledge into the Arctic Council if it's not already there. We also see ourselves a little bit as science ambassadors. Of course, you know that Switzerland has also quite a large footprint, being a rather rich country in terms of CO2 emissions. We also have major financial companies and resource companies in Switzerland. And I think with having a more formal role with the Arctic Council, the attention of the Arctic is much higher compared to just being informally contributing as scientific experts towards the Arctic Council. Now, beyond that, I think looking into my own perspectives, what is it useful for to be involved in the Arctic Council? I think as a professor at the University of Zurich, I definitely profit a lot from the insights I get. Actually, the insights are changing the way I'm writing proposals. So I'm informed about the actual questions that are of importance to the Arctic Council and to the permanent participants. So we are actually kind of moving towards a co-production to get through the Arctic Council. And of course, also the students are very much interested in what is happening in the Arctic. And it is a difference if I can tell them about what the Arctic Council believes are important questions, scientific questions, but really going way beyond, such as the wildfire initiative you're currently leading. And then last but not least, we have been discussing or heard a bit about solutions for the Arctic, and we of course know the solution. CO2 emission reduction is the solution because, for example, solar radiation management means that we still have a very high CO2 level in the atmosphere. And as I'm a biodiversity expert, I know that this will lead to physiological forcing, plant physiological forcing, but also acidification of the ocean. Anyway, I think going back to the biodiversity and the Arctic Council, we are concerned about how can we lead towards a more positive vision of biodiversity in the future, which is of course also of concern for the Arctic Council and CAFF. So this summer we are organizing the World Biodiversity Forum again, and we'll have a workshop where we bring together indigenous people, scientists, policymakers, artists to discuss about positive visions of biodiversity, how we can also get there. And I'm very pleased that the CAFF leadership is participating in the workshop and also uses this as an informal meeting space to get together and take next steps. Thank you very much.
Gabriela, thank you very much indeed. Thank you. And we'll move on to our next speaker, Volker Rachold, who is the head of the German Arctic office. Volker, you've been on that side of the fence, that's kind of the same side of the fence that I'm on from a UK Arctic office perspective, but you've also been on the IASC, International Arctic Science Committee side of the fence as executive secretary in the past. So over to you for your thoughts and reflections.
Yeah, thank you, Henry. I think at this conference here, you see that Germany has a really strong interest in Arctic research. And I think this is also, of course, reflected in the German's Arctic policy guidelines, which are very much focused on research. I would think that Germany has a larger research program in the Arctic than many of the Arctic countries, actually. So, and of course, we have quite a bit of expertise that we can provide to the Arctic Council, and our foreign office, which is responsible for Germany's Arctic policy, is of course very interested that German science and expertise is brought into the various activities and various expert groups and working groups of the Arctic Council. And I think we are quite successful. So we have experts for all the working groups, maybe one exception, and also for all the expert groups. I myself am also sitting as a German delegate on the AMAP working group, Arctic Monitoring and Assessment Program. And we are very much interested and very much engaged in getting people into the working groups. I don't want to go too much into the detail of the science that we are contributing, but rather explain the process, how we do it. So we have a forum that we call Arctic Dialogue, where we twice per year invite all the German stakeholders from politics. So it involves 7 federal ministries that have an interest in the Arctic in Germany. It also involves the agencies. It involves the research institutes, the NGOs, the think tanks. So in principle, all the stakeholders we have or let's say Arctic stakeholders we have in Germany, and we meet twice a year. And of course, that's a fantastic pool of experts. So from that pool of people, we are able to find the right people for the various activities in the Arctic Council working groups. And so this is how we try to populate the working groups with the right people from research, but also from agencies and other fora we have in Germany. And of course, they are then appointed by the Federal Foreign Office, sitting on the Arctic Council as observer. And then we have a mechanism how they report back. So once a year we are organizing meetings with all these experts. Last year, of course, we did it only virtually because of COVID restrictions, but we try to do it each year so that everyone knows what the responsibilities are, and how the reporting has to be done back to the Foreign Office, and also that people exchange their experience on the different working groups of the Council. So that's how we operate, and I think it works quite well. So, and just to give a few examples, of course, for us, working groups like AMAP, but also CAFF, so Conservation Arctic Flora and Fauna, and PAIN, Protection of the Arctic Marine Environment, are really key working groups because we have lots of expertise on that. We also have people in other groups. Just to give a few examples, for example, Arctic marine litter and microplastics. We have a very, very strong research group in the Alfred Wegener Institute supporting that. We have the Environmental Protection Agency, very much interested in marine shipping, underwater noise and those kind of things, but also other things. For CAFF, we have a group supporting the Arctic Migratory Bird Initiative, just to give a few examples of what we did. And we also, I should mention that as well, because there was a very interesting session this morning. We also have a working group, or a group in Potsdam working specifically with indigenous peoples on co-design and co-creation. And they have very good contacts with Sami Council and also other indigenous groups on the Arctic Council. So also in that context, we are trying, of course, to support the Arctic Council and to work with the various partners on the Arctic Council. So I think I leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you, Volker. Thank you very much indeed. And we'll move on to our next speaker, Annette Scheepstra. Annette, you're the Dutch observer to the Sustainable Development Working Group, and you're based at the Arctic Centre in the University of Groningen. I think particularly you have an interest in kind of the co-production of knowledge, as Volker was beginning to talk about. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, what Volker just mentioned about co-production of knowledge, and I work closely with that group, so I have a keen interest in that. But I would like to start with how the Netherlands got involved as an observer at the Arctic Council. And that was already before the Arctic Council was started. We were interested in the work of AMAP. And we, if I talk about we, I talk about the Arctic Centre where I'm based, which is a very interdisciplinary small research institute in the University of Groningen. And that interest starts from the pollution. Before the Arctic Council was founded, the cooperation was really focused on environmental issues and on pollution. And of course, sources of the pollution came from outside the Arctic. So it makes sense to be involved as one of the countries that's responsible for these pollutions. So my colleague got involved in AMAP already from the early days, and she's still involved in that. And he's really focused on distribution of mercury emissions, radioactivity in that sense. So the second group we got involved in a little bit later was CAFF, and also that makes sense, and that is also what you said, Volker, with flyways, with migratory birds. We share with Germany and Denmark a very important area, the Wadden Sea area, where many birds that are coming from the Arctic go to, or they leave the Wadden Sea area to go to the Arctic. So it does make sense to work on that topic for us. So for a long time we have been involved in work on flyways on the seabird group. And then the Netherlands is one of the few countries that have ratified the ILO Convention 169, also known as the Indigenous and Tribal Peoples Convention. That was signed from 1989. And in that sense, we also take responsibility in working with indigenous peoples. And there's also my personal interest. So the last years, well, it has been discussed a lot with the working groups on hold. We really try to stay involved in a lot of the work. So we took opportunities. For instance, my colleague took part in a white paper from the UN on mercury assessments. So this is work that can feed straight into AMAP work as soon as the working groups recontinue. And the same from my colleague from CAFF, who was involved in a project called Sea Track. They look at non-breeders' distribution of seabirds. And also there is a strong connection about the Arctic Council expert group on seabirds. So many of the same people convenient in other groups. So in that way, we really try to continue the work without the working groups, but essentially also a little bit with the working group members. So hopefully, as soon as it starts, the work we do in that regard can continue. And then, as said, a bit more closely to the work from the Sustainable Development Working Group, we have really been focusing on how can we work with indigenous peoples. I'm very much interested in the methodology. So it's much said that we need to work with indigenous peoples and with indigenous communities, but how do you do that? And there is still a lot to learn, and we had a great session about that also this morning. And I work closely with a colleague of mine who has underground experience in working with a group in Arctic Canada. So it might not be very big, but we have a long commitment. And then there are still, on an individual basis, many people that contribute to reports. And more recently, we got also active in PAIM, but it is not from the Arctic Center, it's Wageningen University, and then especially in the Marine Litter Group, since that is also a priority from the Dutch government. I would leave it by that. Thank you.
Annette, thank you very much indeed. And then we'll now move on to our final speaker, who is the Special Envoy for Arctic Affairs, Sam Tan, from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Singapore. Singapore is one of the more recent of the Arctic observers, but absolutely no less important kind of for that. And Singapore has achieved enormous amount in terms of its contribution as an observer. So perhaps you'd like to kind of take the floor from here.
Thank you, Henry. I just realized that I'm the last speaker for the day. And suddenly I don't have the last word of the day. And also realized that being the last speaker, I'm actually standing between you and the reception later. So I shall try to be briefed. Despite the geographic distance, Singapore actually has been an Arctic observer state since 2013. So it has been more than 10 years. And in the last 10 years, Singapore actually has been participating very actively in many of the Arctic Council working groups. In fact, the last count that I did was that we were actually quite actively involved in 4 out of 6 working groups under the Arctic Councils. And interestingly, Annette just now mentioned about the tracking of Arctic migratory birds. So I thought I just want to deviate a little from my presentation to talk about Singapore's effort in tracking the Arctic migratory birds. Although Singapore is almost 10,000 kilometers away from the Arctic, But importantly, Singapore is also one of the stopover for some of the migratory Arctic birds. And the important thing of monitoring all these Arctic birds is that gives us the opportunity to actually monitor the health after flying tens of thousands of kilometers from the eastern Siberia along the Australasia flyway. And then some of them actually make Australia their next destination. And one interesting thing that we actually encountered was that in 2015, we caught, because we trapped the birds just to find out their conditions and all that. So in 1915, we tracked the bird, and then just to realize that the bird has been caught and tagged before. And the last time it was caught and tagged, it was actually in 1996. So for a period of 19 years, this particular bird has been faithfully flying from north to south and then return to the homeland in the eastern Siberia side. So I'm just wondering that how many birds actually are so resilient that they are able to survive a long 19 years. And that actually gives us the motivation. One of our government agencies is so motivated that we actually have put in efforts and resources to step up our monitoring of the Arctic migratory birds. Because although small as a bird as it may be, it actually tells us a big story about if we do not take care of the environment, not just in the Southeast Asia, but also in the Arctic region, we might just have lost a very important a human heritage and a possession, because the future generations may not have the opportunities of appreciating and admiring this species of bird. So coming back, through our participation in the Arctic Council's working groups, Singapore actually has shared whatever we know, our knowledge, our experiences in a few key areas. One of which is the oil spills, a containment. And then the other one is search and rescue operations, plus biodiversity conservation and a sustainable energy development. And we hope to be able to do more in the coming months as these working groups are starting to resume their activities after a hiatus of 3 to 4 years. Firstly, because of the COVID, that a lot of collaborations actually had come to a stop. And then in the last 2 years, because of the war on Ukraine. And much of our work, actually, in the Arctic Council has been related to climate change, which poses an existential threat to low-lying Singapore. As part of our climate change strategy, we also focus on the Arctic research, where our government agencies and institutes of higher learning actually have been actively participating in Arctic-related researches with their counterparts. Just to share a few examples, like for example, in April 2023, 2 researchers from the Nanyang Technological University in Singapore actually joined expeditions to the Barents Seas to study Earth and marine science, and also to understand the natural methane emissions from the seabed. And NTU also conducted 2 research expeditions to the south and north Norway in October 2022 and also in August 2023, respectively, to conduct Arctic-related research. And in June and August 2023, that's last year, scientists from another university from Singapore, that is National University of Singapore, conducted 2 study trips to Svalbard, each lasting about a month, to gain insights on the climate change processes in the region. These are just a few examples of the work that Singapore has been doing at a scientific level, on top of our government agencies' contributions at the various levels of the Arctic Council. While that said, I think there's always room for more cooperation in this area. And NUS collaborated with research institutions, such as the Norwegian Universities of Science and Technology and Arctic University of Norway, during the June and August expeditions Likewise, for other universities in Singapore, they also work with the Arctic counterparts universities during their expeditions. And we welcome further collaboration, such as signing of an MOU between National University of Singapore and the Arctic University of Norway in September 2023. And the purpose of signing this SU is to further provide opportunities for Singapore and UIT to conduct more joint research and developments, on critically important topics related to the Arctic. So all these collaborations are actually very important, in enhancing the interest among Singaporean scientists. And therefore, we hope that with what we know, we are able to make our contributions to the studies in the Arctic region as a member of the international community to enhance the Arctic well-being and to make sure that Arctic is cool again. It's getting warmer these years. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you to you and to all our speakers for their opening remarks. We're shortly going to come to you as an audience, and you can give your questions or your comments or your reflections on what you've heard from the panel here this afternoon. Before we do that, I'll perhaps just take a moment's kind of privilege as the UK representative, just to say that the UK is also re-energizing its engagement with the Arctic Council working groups. So I think partly as a direct result of the fact that it was paused for 2 years, the UK government has provided money directly into researchers, so not through the Research Council, but directly to researchers through our office to re-energize and re-engage that support. Quite a large amount of money, and I think we've just come to the end of our application process to get in all those good ideas, and over the course of the next month or so, we'll be sharing those. And it's a really good spread of new engagement with PAIM and CAFF and AMAP and lots of the other working groups as well. So that's really, really good to see and very welcome from our side. So we are in your hands for questions. So if you would like to put your hand up, I've got a pretty good view of the audience here. So yeah, just in the middle, please. Thank you. If you just briefly introduce yourself and then your question, please.
Thank you very much. Clarissa Duvigneau, German ambassador to Iceland. So I'm not a scientist. I'm very impressed by everything you told us about your research and the various fields. My question is very concrete. How does your status as observers influence your capability to interact, to cooperate with others in the Arctic Council with regard to research? And what's the difference between, concretely, when now the working groups are up and running again, between a member state scientist, an observer state scientist, and a scientist who comes from a non-observer state in the Arctic Council? Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your question. Morten, would you reflect on that?
Well, I can try. I think people here maybe have experience from being actively working within a project. A project lead or co-lead will be, or especially lead will be an Arctic Council state or permanent participant indigenous. But apart from that being in the lead position, my impression and what it should be is that when the scientists work together, those who are scientists within a project delivery, that's on an equal basis, and their capacity, their knowledge, their input, that is what is needed and appreciated. So in a political terms, that does not make a difference in terms of providing the science or expertise that goes into a project. The difference is when that proposal is then dealt with within the council, then it's the core members who assess this and see if this requires political attention or something like that. So the project work is very much on an equal footing. I hope that if someone has different experience, I'm more than happy to hear about it. And there might be different experiences because before the pause, we had approximately 130 projects. So there's a huge variety of projects as well.
Thank you, Morten. Anyone else like to reflect on that? Volker?
Yeah, I think one point that is important to note, of course, is that much of the Arctic Council science is actually assessment, which means you are not doing new science, but you review and put together existing science. So that's most of the working groups of the Arctic Council are working that way, that they do assessments. And that means that when we look for people who can contribute to those kind of things, we look for ongoing research, which is done anyway, which fits into these assessments. So from that point of view, in many cases, this is not new science that you initiate and new partners that you need, but rather existing science, which is already being done anyway, and that contributes to the Arctic Council assessments. So this is how I would think many of the things in the Arctic Council working groups, how they operate.
Maybe if I just can add, so you can, of course, as a scientist, contribute to the expert groups working on given questions. However, as a delegate from Switzerland, as an observer, I can sit in the working group and listen to these discussions among the Arctic nations. And this is very different in terms of the process, because I hear what the permanent participants, for example, report on a given report, or what they would like to have changed, or what comments are coming up, what questions are coming up. And all of this is only possible if you're an observer state.
Thank you very much.
Can I just follow on that? Well, I'm glad that you raised that important questions, because that gives countries like Singapore an opportunity to participate in scientific research and studies related to Arctic and climate change. Because climate change to Singapore is a very big story. It actually poses existential threat to Singapore. Like, for example, the freaky weather patterns, which are quite common these days, and then the rising sea level, which really challenges the physical survival of Singapore, because Singapore is so small. We only have 720 square kilometers, smaller than many islands in the lake. And therefore, one-third of Singapore actually is low-lying area, coastal area, very low-lying, less than 5 meters above the sea level. So if the sea level keeps rising, and one day Singapore will surely be overrun by sea waters. And therefore, we take climate change studies and Arctic-related studies, particularly if they are related to rising sea level, very seriously. So our government and also our universities are very keen to work with like-minded partners in the Arctic regions and also in other observer states. So for those of you who have concrete good projects that you would like to look for partners, you can always let us know. And our universities and the government agencies are always open to explore those projects. And we will take part in it, collaborate with our partners where our resources and the expertise are in our possession. Thank you.
And this is a really important point, isn't it? Because we've had countries that wanted to be Arctic Council observers in the past, and that was not agreed. And the reality of the situation is that it's hard to see a new set of observers being admitted in the foreseeable future. So as the interest in Arctic science expands, as there are other countries who are capable and kind of willing to do that science, then there needs to be a way for them to feed in as appropriate through the working groups, even if they're not part of kind of official observers. There may be connections and links through countries that are observers to bring some of that good work in, even if it's not formally as an observer. Do we have other questions? At the front, please. Yeah, thank you.
My name is Robert Cadis. I happen to be Deputy Senior Arctic Official from Canada. Thankful to hear all of your perspectives. Just an observation I wanted to make, and it was expressed in your presentations, that each of you bring a different set of interests and competencies and capabilities to the work of the Arctic Council, which is very much appreciated. And it also highlights that there is no expectation by Arctic Council members, states, and permanent participants that each of the 30+ observers attend every working group meeting, engage in every project. We were looking for the best of what you're able to offer, advice, expertise, project advice, and that comes through in, as Morten said, the 130 or so projects that were on the books prior to the pause. My second observation would be to say that in addition to the expertise that Arctic, non-Arctic states bring to the Arctic Council, there are also a number of other bodies, intergovernmental bodies, NGOs that bring a great deal of expertise in very specific parts of the Arctic Council agenda, which we heavily rely on in the Arctic Council work. So again, thank you very much for all that you're bringing to the Council.
Okay, thank you. Annette, did you want to?
Yeah, maybe to add on that, thank you. I think you mentioned it also, because being at meetings of the Arctic Council, you also learn a lot about things that are going on. We at the Arctic Center, we adjust our research agenda a little bit to the work that is related to the Arctic Council. But we also teach students, and we teach students a lot about our experience and the work of the Arctic Council. So it's also spread via the young generation. And so what we learn in all these processes will feed on in the next generation as well.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other questions? Yes, please. Yep.
Hello, hi. My name is Frida Salim. I am a student at Envoy University, and I'm currently writing my bachelor thesis on language and international studies. This might be a very basic and back to basics question, and this may have been also suited to the panel before, but I did not get the opportunity to ask. But what I wanted to ask, that we are being taught right now quite a bit that climate change cannot be stopped. It can only be mitigated, and I know I'm kind of throwing my professors here under the bus by saying that we are being taught that as of now. But when we were discussing on the earlier panel about how science is trying to get ahead and indeed stop and perhaps even reverse the effects of climate change, I feel like it comes into a combat between, is it possible on regards to political term, or is it even possible when it comes to the actual science? So I wanted to ask, what do you think of this discussion between, can climate change really be stopped and reversed, or can it only be mitigated, and what should be taught to the generations that are coming? I'm not talking just about millennials, but I'm also talking about Gen Z, so they can continue this mission. Thank you.
Good question. They've all been good questions, but that's a good question. This is very much a kind of a live issue within the International Arctic Science Committee and kind of within other organisations and nationally as well, as you saw in the last panel. Absolutely. Gabriela, I mean, you're leading a piece of work on this kind of for the International Arctic Science Committee and others. Do you want to reflect on that a little bit?
I get this question a lot from my students as well, and they want to see action and solutions and not just hear about the problems and the dull future, of course. And it is indeed a very tricky question, because right now with the emission pathway we are on, it doesn't look very good. So maybe we just have to rather adapt. But this is also why I think maybe we need to think about what do we want to achieve in terms of the future, and then think about the actions we need for it. And maybe this goes beyond just the climate warming, but actually also about, as I just explained, biodiversity. Where do we see the biodiversity in the future? And this also from the indigenous perspective, and how do we manage then the changes that are coming up? So even if we have to adapt, we need to take action anyway. You know, we cannot just sit and wait, basically. So I think in any way, whether we are cutting down emissions quickly or not, we need to think about the future very quickly. That's probably the best I can say right now.
Annette, please.
Yeah, there are so many changes going on, and it goes so rapidly. People that live in the Arctic already have to adapt to all these changes and are already concerned about food security, water security, and there are all these big hazards that are impacting people. So that's also what we teach our students. We need to be aware of that the change is already going on for a long time.
All right, thank you very much. Any last questions? Yes, Rolf, I recognize.
Thank you, Henry. It was actually more like a comment on one of the earlier questions, but the climate question also made it relevant. I just want to say on the question on experts from AMEP's side, they are evaluated by the scientific merit. So we do have experts from the Arctic states, permanent participants, observers, but also non-observer states. So it's only, I mean, it can be nominated by the colleagues or anything. So as long as you can contribute to the work, you're more than welcome. And then, of course, when it comes to the financial part, that's supported by the states. And I also would like to thank the observers and others. I mean, our climate report, and this comes to the last question here, is now undergoing peer review on both the, as was mentioned by Volker here, about already established data, but also new data and like knowledge from the indigenous peoples. And for that, we had a lot of nominations of reviewers from the observers. So in total, we had 104 nominations for reviews of one report. And that's really a major contribution to the work we do, and to have it assessed and quality assured from states also outside of the Arctic. So thanks.
Great. Thank you very much, Rolf. Thank you. All right, perhaps I might take the privilege, just before we finish, of a final question. So, Morten, you're seeing the observers kind of re-engaging in the projects and the processes, and it's different levels at different times, but it's a warm, positive feeling of the observers coming back. Are you seeing the same re-engagement with the projects from all the Arctic Council states? To be frank, is Russia re-engaging in the way that everyone would hope that it would, the process having restarted?
Let me phrase it like this, and this is it's serious. I'm a chair for all 8 Arctic states, and I don't want to go into the individual state, but what I see is that every state, every single state is constructively looking at how they can re-engage. And it's not about the issues not being important, and they don't want it, finding the way to do it. So the chairman, Grimson, spoke about, being a little innovative in how we organize the project work actually to facilitate so we can advance. So that will be part of the process. So I see a lot of people stepping up to the plate to be able to do. So we actually can have the gaps. We have a strategic plan which have some high-level targets, but which is very important. And we are starting internally to look at a gap analysis. Where do we not have adequate work going on? And with the help of observers, I'm hopeful that we can fill some of these gaps. There have always been gaps, but we see there is a fear that the gap will now be wider due to political and mostly political aspects. So we have to be all the states are committed, but yes, there are obstacles which has been discussed here. Since I have the floor and probably my last time, I just want to say I'm also so grateful for these observers as well as the others, and I know that they are also extremely conscious of, we are 8 states, but we are also 6 indigenous organizations at the table, and how important it is that these organizations engage with observers, but that the observers engage with them also in designing project activity and in actual, when they do the science. And that's really crucial. And I do know that from these experienced observers, this is not breaking news, but it is very important that it's said as well.
Very good. Apologies for putting you on the spot, but thank you very much. So I think we'll finish there, and we'll hopefully send you off for a drink and something to eat in a positive mood, knowing that as much as possible is happening from the observers, and we are supporting the Arctic Council processes as best we possibly can. So thank you very much. Have a good evening, and we'll see you tomorrow. Thank you.